My name is Tyler Morgenstern. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Film and Media Studies here at UC Santa Barbara. And it's my great pleasure today to moderate our event this afternoon and to welcome our esteemed guests, Trent Atkinson and Brandon Stansell. Trent is filmmaker and writer and director of the new documentary, Three Chords and a Lie. And Brandon is, of course, the subject of that documentary and a country singer-songwriter. So welcome to you both and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm just so pleased that we were able to pull this event together. And to me, it kind of hits like all three of my main bases, which is like filmmaking, country music, and being gay. So it's like very exciting. I'm very excited to dig into this. So let's just get right to it. I mean, it's a mighty trifecta, but anyways. So let's just start with a little bit of where this project came from and how it really started to come together. So Trent, I wonder if you might give us a little bit of a sense of how the project took shape, how you came to know Brandon, and how the two of you together not only decided to tell this story, but decided to tell it in the way that you did, and particularly you, given your background in film and television, although not documentary, how you made the choice to sort of make the leap into documentary to really come to grips with this story of Brandon's.
Yeah, thanks for having us, firstly. It's really exciting to be here. I met Brandon firstly through Jim, of all places. He just moved to LA, and he'd come in with his southern voice and his big laugh, wearing this bandana, and I thought, this kid. And I found out he was a singer, and because I'd been making sort of films and things for a while, when I heard his music, I said he needed some videos because I was so impressed by what he was doing, and I wanted to help. And so that's really how our creative relationship started. We became dear friends, but I ended up directing, I don't even know, 6 or some I don't know, a bunch of videos for Brandon. And then from that, when this project came in, initially it sort of came in as something his management floated, that there was interest in making a documentary about his music, and then I kind of, being a bit sneaky, thought I'd use that to really, because I knew a bit of Brandon's story, and I knew how important it is and how resonant it could be. And so I sort of wanted to broaden out the scope of the documentary to not just look at his music and what he's doing now, but to sort of dig into how Brandon, as his path is a bit of a microcosm for something that a lot of queer people can really sort of resonate with, but also something that I think it just feels very, very of the time and very important right now, as like barriers getting broken down everywhere. So so I sort of came up with this idea for framing it around this 1 week of his life, going back home, and kind of convinced him that was something we should do. And bless him, he trusted me.
Brandon, did it take substantial convincing to undertake this project?
Well, I never really wanted to do anything like this, and so it was wildly off my radar. I was writing I was writing a new record at the time, and it was kind of slated to come out in the summer, and it came out this past summer. But it was basically all about. I just had this real passion to bring queer stories to country music. I just felt like, obviously the genre has a representation problem, not just with queer people, but I just really passionate about trying to bring that to this world. So in the middle of all of that, I was presented with this opportunity to do this documentary through Out TV, who's one of the big producing partner on it, and I kind of turned it down first, and then I had a friend tell me, it kind of reposition the project as as a vehicle to kind of reach people that where maybe my music couldn't, and so I kind of like shifted my thinking on it, and obviously I'd worked with Trent for years, and he's one of my dearest friends, and so I trusted him, which is a big mistake. So I kind of viewed it as an extension of this, this EP that I was working on, and as another kind of way to tell my story.
Well, I think you're stuck with Trent now, so.
I
No, it's a lovely collaboration. And I think that we'll talk about this in a bit, but the intensely personal and intimate nature of this story, I mean, I think is dealt with really deftly and really sensitively in the film itself. So I think that kind of production, I think, comes from a strong working relationship between the two of you. So I think it's quite clear in the film, however much you might be at each other's throats at any given time. And you mentioned that Out TV was one of the producing partners on this. I wonder if you can just run us through a little bit of the life of the actual production, because my first familiarity with it came through when it was available throughout TV. It has since had formal festival premieres at Nashville, as well as at Outfest in Los Angeles. And now it lives on Amazon Prime, where it can be streamed. So one or both of you, could you maybe just like walk us through the journey this film has taken from that point where you decided to undertake the collaboration to where it now lives on Prime, and what it took to get it there?
B, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so again, it was Out TV that kind of brought it to us. And that was when Trent got on board and started kind of mapping out what it was going to look like. And honestly, all of the shooting and the creative part of it took a week. You know, we flew to Nashville, and then drove to my hometown, Chattanooga, in the same week. And then the show that I did at the Choo Choo in Chattanooga that night, we wrapped the show. Trent and I got in a car, drove back to Nashville, and I was on a 5 a.m. flight home to LA the next morning. So it all happened really quickly. And then we had a few more people kind of jump on board. My friend Leslie Jordan, who is also a Chattanoogan, who I met when I moved out here to LA. He was one of the first people that I met randomly at a Starbucks. We just became friends, and he became a producing partner on this thing too. We were running out of money, and Leslie stepped in and ended up paying for the rest of this project, which was incredible. And then from there, we once it was kind of all sewn up and finished, we sent it back to Out, and then entered it in a few festivals, and had the privilege of having it shown at Outfest and Nashville Film Festival this year. And then it's just been slowly distributed across different markets, including the US. Yeah, so that's kind of the life of it.
Great. And I actually wonder, I mean, obviously, this film has come out at an extremely odd time to be promoting and distributing and showing a film, and to do festival premieres when you cannot physically go to festivals and do the fun festival things like go to cocktail parties and all that. So I actually wonder if just for if either of you have some reflections on what it's been like to try and launch this thing in the midst of this pandemic. And I'm also particularly interested to know how the film has been or was received at that Nashville festival, given the way that it stages this kind of critique of the diversity issues in country music, to put it very mildly, how it was received at those festival showings once it was live.
It's been tricky, actually. This has been one of the difficult parts of it. Usually in any screening, any sort of festival you do get the interaction of the audience, and you get to sit and discuss on stage, usually afterwards, especially at premieres, and you can take a very quick barometer of how it's affecting people. Mm-hmm. The closest we've been able to have with that wasn't at Nashville at all, actually, because everything was sort of online and platformed, which was fantastic. But it was sort of a strange experience and unique to this. We had our LA premiere, at least at Outfest, in a drive-through, sort of a setup drive-through, which was, again, great to be able to do. But for any filmmaker, the experience of watching en masse is the immediacy, of interaction. You can hear how it's going down. Of course, you can't do that in your car. You have all these technical things, which, it's coming through. It's a very strange thing. People's, lights kept turning off, car kept turning off, so they have to turn it back on at these. So there's a lot of things you can't control, which in a very unusual way takes you out of being able to get a test of how it's landing. And so what's been so great is, things like this, and, getting the online sort of responses that we've been getting in the absence of that, and the emotional sort of connection it's been making with people. That's really our festival experience. It's been a purely online, purely digital kind of, but in a sense, more personal for it, because it's been direct messages, and it's been people taking their own effort to just say, this really moved me, and this is it did what it was meant to do, if that makes sense.
That's great. I mean, it's very reassuring to know that, yeah, there are these spaces that we can have that kind of connection even outside of the experience of being in a theater, which of course we would normally be doing today, but unfortunately not. And speaking of the emotional weight of this film, let's dig in. That's all the mechanical stuff. Let's talk about the film and this really remarkable story that you've told. So I've now seen the film several times, and I'm still struck when I view it now, as I was the first time, with just how intensely intimate and close and proximate you've told this story. Of course, you sort of gesture at the front end to these larger industrial issues, diversity and representation and equity in the country music industry, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for the most part, the film stays really, really close to the bone, right? And tells a very personal, very intimate story. Trent, I wonder if you can tell us, particularly given that this was your first foray into documentary, how you went about the task. Well, one, why or how you decided to tell the story in this way. And two, how as a director new to this format, you took on this really sensitive, extremely personal material, and material that was really, and it comes across in the film as very live and volatile for Brandon still.
And it was, I think, I struggled with this when it came up as an opportunity. I didn't want to do it if I couldn't contribute something to that sort of genre and tell a story with sort of honesty and let it have some weight. There were limitations. It wasn't a big budget. It was a very small budget. And I've worked in plenty of small budgets, but at that level, it very much, you can't tell a big story in a sense. We couldn't do a lot of time. We couldn't do a lot of shooting or multiple crews. We were limited. So I really spent the bulk of my time in the beginning trying to decide how I could frame a story that would have both the small and the large resonance. And so for me, I got most excited and realized I could do it and should do it when I sort of hit on this idea that it could just be this one snapshot, because I thought that with all the ingredients, the visit home, Brandon had never been home to perform since, his coming out and the trauma of that. It tangled up all the elements that I think make a really good story. The risk, of course, was that it was a very volatile, as you said, very live situation. We really, I will never forget, we do all this work, we get there, we're getting this beautiful footage. And on the morning of the show, we had truly no idea whether anyone will come from his family, whether they'll all come. If they do come, whether there'll be, there's some really personal songs in there, whether that will go down very badly and there'll be some sort of demonstration. We had no idea of any of it. And so that was very difficult. But to me, that was the point. I wanted to respect Brandon's life and his relationships, but I saw an opportunity for his story to be enough sort of honesty and to be raw enough that it could speak and sort of get past a lot of the intellectualization we have around music. And because of that, then go on to reach a lot more people than I think it would have otherwise.
Right. And yeah, and I think that's great. And Brandon, I actually wonder then what the experience was like of making this film and confronting this film from your perspective. You've mentioned in previous interviews and even earlier that you were initially reluctant to do it. And that part of that is because the relationships that are involved, like I said, they're still live. These are still ongoing, real relationships. And so I wonder, was this just kind of a thing where you decided, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go whole hog and tell the story completely honestly and confront it straight on? Or what was your approach or your perspective on telling this story in this way that was so open and vulnerable in a lot of places?
Well, I have this kind of mantra that I use for writing for myself, and that is write what you know. And so a lot of my music has been about my coming out experience and all that. So yeah, I guess when we were starting to work on this project, I just knew that like I was, I obviously trusted Trent. To be honest, I didn't know exactly like step by step what we were doing. I remember we got to Nashville, and Trent knows me so well, and he's, seen, my show at 1,000 times, and he's seen me be interviewed and talk to people, and he kind of knows my shtick. So we get there, and he's he's asking me all these questions that he knows that I am loaded for bear. So I just things that I've been asked a million times that I pretty much have a locked in answer for. And I was starting to wonder what this was going to really be about. I obviously knew I was going to be doing this show, but in my mind, I was thinking more about the show than I was about confronting family, or if they would come or not, or what this story meant beyond the experience that I was having while we were making it. But as the days rolled along, as we got closer to that day, this one would just prod me a little bit more and more every time, to great effect, I think. But I honestly didn't know what was happening. And I know that sounds really weird, but I just trust Trent so much, and I know how talented he is. And so I literally just handed the reins of this thing over to him, and my only job was to answer questions and sing songs. And so that's what I did. But, obviously there's an underlying, there's story there. So yeah, I don't know. It was a very weird, I hope it never happens again experience that this was.
Or something, because I figured if I structured the week right and built the experience right, then it wouldn't be that I've had to construct narrative and edit before, and I didn't want that. I wanted to get truth. Mm-hmm. And so, knowing Brandon well, as he says, I did have a sense of how his walls would be up. And so I built the whole thing sort of very inverted. I just gave him everything. We did all the easy stuff, to the point where I was day 2 or something, or 3, and we're driving down to Chattanooga, and I knew sort of where we're headed. Brandon's like being really gracious. He's like, can I ask you some intimate questions? And I just laughed. I was like, oh, thank you. And knowing sort of, probably what was headed. And then, but what that was, it was sort of boiling the frog in a nice way without being manipulative.
A very friendly boiling of the frog. Yeah.
It was really awful.
Yeah. But I think that, no one would ever want to do what he did willingly. No one would ever willingly put himself under that much exposure. I am blown away by how honest he is and how willing he was to go there. And so I was really, really aware of the fact that that's the sort of thing I didn't want to drop him in unawares of. Mm-hmm. But I also didn't, want to miss the opportunity for people to see that queer people in similar situations have to exhibit such an outweighed amount of courage just in their day-to-day, in their youth, often at the point where they're most vulnerable. And I sort of wanted to show people that, like, here's someone doing it still, and hey, it's terrifying. You're going to do it, and you're going to feel great, and you're going to be fine. And I think that's the sort of thing that people do need, especially, queer kids in small towns in the country in the South. Mm-hmm. So he was a guinea pig, but he was a really good one.
Wonderful praise. I actually wonder, it's interesting that you're sort of pointing to this, the process by which you sort of worked up to this, this feature show that of course is the sort of climax of the film, because I was sort of struck watching it, there's this sort of emotional tone of it, which is of course very open, very intimate, very honest. But I also found that stylistically, formally, I felt that as I was watching it, it had the bearing almost of a kind of home movie, or of a kind of family movie. And of course there is literal home movies and found footage of Brandon's former career and various show show ensembles and these kinds of things. So there is actually home video, but there's a certain foundness in, like, a certain found quality to even the original footage that you shot. There's a willingness to stay with things and to like let them unfold, however contingent, such as like when your mother cancels on that first interview before the interview at the show, right? Doesn't turn up for that interview. There's a kind of contingency to it that makes it feel somewhat like an informal kind of off the cuff kind of text, right? And so I wonder, were those stylistic choices something that just kind of fell out of the production context, given how that it was low budget or whatever, or was this like a deliberate choice to try and use the conventions of the home movie or the personal diary almost as a storytelling technique?
More the latter. There was limit, and we shot on a very expensive camera. We had the gear we had was, I've shot features on, but the intention was to really try to capture something that was unfiltered. I wanted beautiful realism as much as possible, and I think that is by default messy at times. But I think that memories are messy, families are messy. The things we go through are messy to a degree. So if an audience is allowed into that sort of mess and it has a point and it has a heart, I think it's really, I think it's Maya Angelou said, you just want to slip under the skin and be received. It's got to get into the blood. And I think that style of shooting was the most effective for that, and gave us an opportunity. And in terms of getting to know Brandon, which was my other job, I felt like in this, I wanted to introduce people to him and his music. That's how he is. He is informal and intimate and natural. And I thought that it would be a disservice to try to polish up something that is inherently not. Like Brandon's polish is fantastic. But his nature
yeah, ragged as all hell.
Yeah. He makes me sound like I just described Cornfield's a hee-haw. He's like, this guy.
No, you know what I mean, though. It's,
doesn't even have shoes. This guy.
Just authentic. And I wanted it to try to capture that authenticity. And I also think that anytime we try to sort of glorify or polish up the past, we're doing it a disservice. And so I really wanted to try to just capture, as honestly as possible.
Right. Yeah, and to extend that a little bit, I really kind of felt watching the film multiple times that, this seems kind of obvious and facile at first glance, but to me, it seems the film is really in a substantial and kind of complicated way about the concept of home, right? That, and not just in this sort of like easy way, but it's about the possibility of home, and home is also a problem, as something that's difficult and that you have to fight for and that slips away and that you have to like remake in these kind of improvisational ways sometimes. And of course, this sort of like unfolds over the course of the film. We open with Brandon being introduced through the production of the video for Hometown, the single Hometown, which then frames a literal homecoming, a kind of homecoming narrative. Along the way, we visit the Nashville launch pad and we engage stories of queer youth experiencing homelessness in the South. And then we meet a large cast of characters who at various points in Brandon's life, right, have helped you to create something like home when you perhaps didn't have the most conventional form of it. And then right at the end, right prior to that last performance of Hurt People, we have this interview with your mother where she expresses in a really, I think, earnest and very honest way, this belief that you will return home, right? That there will be this homecoming at some point in the future. And it struck me that over the course of the film, there's this sort of unfolding of the problem of home where it takes these wildly different forms, and it makes it clear that it's something that has to be kind of struggled over, that it is not easy, that it involves all kinds of exclusions that you have to contend with and come to grips with and learn to fight, if that's in certain cases, right? So Brandon, maybe you could start this one, but can you maybe reflect a little bit on how that concept of home or homeliness or homecoming, right, helped to shape the experience of making the film? And I'm just thinking of this in particular because it's that the complexity of home in this film is so different than the way home is dealt with in a lot of country music culture, right? Which is something that's easily nostalgic. It's a place that you remember fondly. It's a place of the good old days and of homecoming kings and queens and all of these things, right? So it's this very different rendering of home. And so I wonder, from your perspective as somebody in the kind of country music culture, whether that was sort of front of mind for you in the course of creating the film.
Yeah, well, actually, it was more on the back end. Like I said, I give all the credit to Trent in terms of the way this is structured and how it got laid out and everything. But I had a lot to think about on the the other end of it, and I actually got home and was driving down Santa Monica Boulevard, and this Sam Hunt's new song, I think Kinfolks came out. I think that's the name of it. But anyway, it's that song that you're talking about that's so easy for. It's a great song. This is not a dig on that song, but that it's so easy for people to write, because it is about, like, how great that homecoming is, and it's so easy to tap into that. You're going home, and your mom's baking something for your person that you brought, or you're taking them around town, showing them where you went to school and all this stuff. And I remember just driving down, driving around here in LA, and I was like, I could never sing that song. So that's when I actually wrote this. I wrote a song called "Like Us" that made it into the film, and it's basically my version of that sentiment. And it just says home is a home for people like us. And because that is my truth, and that's my story. There's not a road that I can take where I can take someone that I'm dating home to meet my parents and it be a good experience. I can't show them around the town I grew up with and talk about how great it was when it wasn't. And so anyway, I think that it's definitely a powerful theme in the documentary, but one I really didn't know we were fully engulfed in until it was all over.
Right. Yeah. I remember watching the film. I remember thinking, I feel like this is almost like a filmic adaptation of the song "People Like Us," right? It has that same, in the way that, Trent, your use of the home movie, like the conventions of the home movie to tell a story about how difficult home is.
Yeah.
It has this parallel to a song like "People Like Us," which narratively lays out this story of going home. And then the punchline at the end of that chorus, of course, punchline, kind of pulls out the rug from under you and says, well, that story actually isn't available to me, right? So Trent, did you want to add to Brandon's response?
Just a little. I think Brandon says it perfectly, but one reason I think we click is that home, for me, for different reasons, similar, I guess, is complicated and difficult. And I think that home, the idea of what we think of home, is predicated on being wanted there and being accepted there. And I think if you take those two ideas away, it's suddenly a minefield, because you have all the conventions of home, but you have none of the things that underpin what it would be. And I think that's the position so many gay people find themselves in, or anyone who's queer and or different in any capacity. And it's one of the things I like the most about. I love that you picked up on all of those elements and the structure of it. And as we truly got closer and closer to what home is over the course of the piece, it's also why I wanted it to end on stage for Brandon, because the idea to me is that it's not just about the people around him that created him. That to me is the kickoff point for him finding what is going to ground him and be the thing that launches that version of his life going forward. But yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head.
I wonder, actually, just since you've pointed to it, and I've referred to it a couple of times already, but I wonder if we can just zero in for a minute on that kind of final sequence in the film, right? The interview with Brandon's mother, followed up by the performance of "Hurt People," which is, of course, anticipated by that really heart-wrenching rehearsal scene, which is really sort of makes the second performance just land all the harder, right? So, but I'm particularly interested in the interview with Brandon's mother, because it's really kind of startling and breathtaking for a whole variety of reasons. But I think the reason it struck me most is because it's held for so long, right? It comes at the very end. And to that point, we have followed and tracked so closely to Brandon's, we would call them version of events, right? Or his particular set of experiences with his family, with his community, and so forth, right? And we come to have a very clear and really rich understanding of what this all was for you 10 years ago, right? And what it still is now. And then suddenly at the end, we have this interview with your mother that seems to present this absolutely countervailing version of events, right? Where even the language seems to be turned on its head, where again, prior to that first rehearsal of Hurt People, you mentioned that, you know, this comment that your father made, that nothing you do will ever make us proud. And she quite explicitly says, in a way that seems quite earnest, like, we've never been disappointed. Nothing he could do would ever make us not proud, right? And it seems so completely at odds with this whole version of events that we've just come to know. And so 2 questions, one for each of you about this is, Trent, how do you take up the job of carrying out that interview, knowing what you know about the rest of the story, knowing what you've captured for the rest, for the week leading up to it, number one. And then Brandon, what was it like then to watch this film back and sort of particularly encounter that moment where you're probably seeing a version of events that seems totally alien to you? So either one of you, if you want to start off on that one.
Do you want me to jump in, B?
Yeah, you go ahead.
You go first.
Well, you know, it's that whole part of the documentary was so hard to watch. It was the hardest part for me to watch because, you know, my mother, who I love, you know, she, you know, kind of lives in this. It's taken her a long time to even accept that she has a gay son. So when I heard her say in that interview that, you know, I have a homosexual son, you know, that was I'd never heard her say that before. Just to acknowledge that she has a gay son was a new thing for me to hear. And so she's been on a path for, you know, a journey for the past 10 years. And it often goes in circles a lot of times. And that's, I think, what has been the hardest part, you know, because like I said, there's a comment like, you know that anything you do, we're not proud of. And then, oh, you could never not make us proud. And then, you know, in that same breath, it's, you know, well, I wish he were here to spend time with his nieces and nephews. You know, he's really missing out on a relationship I know that they would all love. And then in the same breath, it's, you know, but he can't be here because I don't want a gay person around my nieces and nephews. And I think that's what made it so heartbreaking, is just, and kind of is a, it is very much a picture of kind of that world to me. It's very confusing and it's very cyclical, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense all the time. So yeah, that one was a hard interview to watch. And I had to kind of digest it and then call her back and kind of like run through the interview and, you know, kind of try to make sense, you know, heads or tails of it. But that was definitely the hardest part of the film for me.
Right.
For context also, which I think is interesting in anything, but we didn't know she was coming. Spoilers for people. But that interview, I really had to grab, Brandon was on stage warming up. It was all happening. We had such a short amount of time. And so I sort of really, it was one of those times where I'd heard about this woman for a long time, and my own, you know, I understand what it is for for parents to have a very different version of events than what would necessarily be true. So I was prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for how warmly I felt towards her. Because, and I think it's part of the reason I struggled with how much or little to include of the interview in the film, but there is, and I think it speaks to the complications of family. When I sat with Brandon's mom, who was so gracious and lovely, and I wanted to just sit and chat with her because I felt like I knew her to a degree, she must have known I was a gay person as well. And And so there's a lot that didn't make the documentary, because I think it would have skewed the balance, like too much, oh, she's a monster, she's too lovely. So we really sort of pared down to what was like honest and real there. But it was really difficult, because what I saw more than anything in the contradictions or anything like that, or some of the hurtful things that were said, was her pain. And I saw someone who really suffered from the absence of this relationship. And then for whatever reason, wasn't able to see that her choices were the cause of the block in the relationship, or religion, call it what you will. But to me, it's a hell of a bigger choice than being gay, like choosing to believe, an old book, not to be offensive. But so it was maybe the saddest part of the process for me, because as much as there's hope in it, and you do see these two parts of this woman who's a mother and wants to be a mother, you also felt so completely this sense of a block that might prevent it from happening. When she talks about, I'm not sure if it's in the film, but, maybe not in this lifetime, they'll have a relationship. But that's heartbreaking to me, because at the end of the film, you see her innate response to her son, her pride, watching him sing a song about her that is so complicated and so difficult, and pull out her phone to film it. That's the most complex image in the film to me, and the desire to hug him at the end of that, while at the same time going back to the status quo the day after. Mm-hmm. It is messy, but I think that's why, it's important. It was a tough one, but I couldn't even tell them about the footage. I was we'll get to that in a few months. Yeah.
Right. And I think, and to me, it sort of goes back to this kind of upending of the homecoming narrative, where it's like homecoming is conventionally imagined as this thing that reconstitutes something, right? It makes something whole once more. And the film leaves it allows you allow yourself to leave that space of block, right? Or things don't quite link up in the end, right? I think it's a really wise choice there, or a compelling choice. So while this is obviously a difficult and complicated film emotionally, it is also a film about country music. So as we sort of start to maybe move into the third act of our conversation here, let's talk about that aspect of the film just a little bit. So you both obviously have backgrounds as performers, actors, and so forth. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, respectively, how you found your ways into country music. Brandon, you of course were raised in the South, kind of like in the culture of country music. Was it sort of an easy or natural thing for when you decided you wanted to do music, to find your way into country as a form of storytelling and expression, or was it something that was kind of difficult for you? I remember very distinctly being raised in country music and the culture of country music, and then at some point being like, nope, for a variety of reasons, one of which is I was like, oh, well, I'm real gay and this is not comfortable for me. But then in later years coming back around to it. So I kind of wonder what your experience has been, or what your experience was working your way into country music. And Trent as well, I mean, is country natural to you, or was this kind of your entree to this culture?
Look at that face.
My answer's gonna be quick, so I'll take this first. I was like, and then for a second there, I made some videos for him, and then I shot some stuff for Ty Herndon, and I remember laughing, and like, well, somehow I'm the gay country music video. So that's a quick one, but B?
Well, I mean, like I said, I grew up in Tennessee, and I mean, I started singing when I was 5 and 6 years old, and the first thing I ever did was at the Opry House in Nashville. That was my very first show, so it was like this Easter thing. So it was during the day, and then they would switch over to the Grand Ole Opry at night. They would, the barns would, barn would come in, and our sets would go out.
Well, and just to interrupt, was that the footage we used? Is from that?
No,
very first
different show.
Okay.
But so I was 6, and I had this experience where I came in to our little kid dressing room, and it was locked. And so I was, here I am 6 years old, banging on this door, trying to get in. And I must have stood there for a couple minutes, just, banging away. Nothing's happening. And all of a sudden this woman opens the door and she's like, honey, I think they moved you guys down the hall. And I was like, no, this is my dressing room. She was like, no. She was like, I know. She's like, but I think they moved you. She was like, I think you're down the hall. And I was like, well, who are you? And she was like, well, I'm Faith Hill.
Oh my God. How dare you, Brandon?
I know. So this was her Opry debut that night.
Really
so I got to kind of hang around, and I just saw that every night. And I mean, I was so little, but I always knew that's what I wanted to do. I was very lucky. I've always known what I wanted to do. I've kind of taken a weird path to get here, but country music's always been my thing. And after I came out, that's when I started writing music of my own. So it was kind of just the right timing, I guess.
Right, that's great. And I wonder if you can, as somebody who's kind of has been in the thick of the country world for a long time and remains in it, I wonder if we can sort of tackle just really briefly, if we can briefly, this kind of issue that kind of comes up briefly in the film, but has come up in our conversation as well, the kind of diversity and representation and inclusion problem in country music, which has deep, deep historical roots. This is nothing new, but it is shocking just how obstinate parts of the country industry have been, particularly commercial country radio, has been to broadening the cohort of artists that they're willing to represent and program and showcase. And it seems to me that in the past 5-7 years, there's been a kind of real flourishing of a much more diverse and like much more varied and interesting cohort of country artists who are doing really cool work, but it's well outside of the realm of commercial country radio. It seems to be on the streaming services, non-commercial radio like NPR, even YouTube has this like very vibrant, rich country folk Americana, old time kind of community on there. So, and I'm just thinking of things like Spotify's Indigo playlist, which they set up exactly to showcase artists that commercial country radio overlooks. Apple Music has released a similar slate of playlists and programming. Reese Palmer, the amazing Reese Palmer, of course, now hosts a program on Apple Music called Color Me Country, which centers Black, Latinx, and Indigenous contributions to country music, past and present. So I wonder, sort of in this moment where there seems to be a real kind of recalcitrance within commercial country radio, but this real exciting energy elsewhere in the country world, where you see opportunities for growth and change, and how you see yourself fitting into this kind of like emerging landscape of country music.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the great and exciting thing is that it is changing. I mean, you're right in saying that, the radio programmers across the commercial radio programmers across the country are the ones dragging their feet, while everyone, I think, else is kind of forging ahead. But we are seeing some amazing representation finally in, I mean, we're talking about a genre who's been hesitant to play women. They had a representation problem in every kind of form and facet that you could imagine. So now that we are, finally seeing women back on the charts is, one step forward, but we're finally seeing, queer artists, we're finally seeing people of color, and all of the intersections in between. So, I mean, it's really kind of an exciting place to be right now. At least I feel that way, because it really does feel like, there's space where there wasn't before. And I know that it's taken some time to get here. And I know that it's taken a lot of work and a lot of brave people, including my friend Ty Herndon and Shelley Wright, who kind of helped pave a path for artists like me to exist. So I don't know. I obviously think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that there's a lot of people doing it, and that helps. So I think that the genre is really kind of taken a turn, and is gonna be a lot different, moving forward.
Yeah, and on that, I'll just give one last of my own questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. But it seems to me also that Three Chords and a Lie has a real opportunity to be a part of that, the work that needs to be done, doing the work that needs to be done, not just within the country industry, but it also strikes me that there's been a real kind of smattering of films over the past 5 years or so that are really invested in telling wider and more interesting and diverse stories about country music and its culture and the people who make it. So just a few that I was able to come up with were a film like Wild Rose from 2018 by Tom Harper, which is wonderful. The new Ken Burns sprawling magnum opus, right, which in its own very Ken Burns way, right, deals with the really broad historical formation of country music, and that it's not this singly white Southern male thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, or The Year Dolly Parton Was My Mom is a really cute little Canadian independent film, and also even a film like Dumplin', which you can see on Netflix, which taps into this like wonderful convergence of like drag culture, Southern pageant culture, and country music, which is like all kind of one thing. So in that context, I guess my final question to you would be, in the context of these new stories and new forms of country music, who's watching Three Chords? And how is it helping them to understand country music differently, and the people who love it and the people who make it a little bit differently?
Yeah, you know what? On the outset of this thing, when I was kind of asked that question, it wasn't really asked exactly like that, but I said that my hope for this film was that it would reach queer people first, that especially now, I was so happy with the timing and the way that this worked out, that we were able to release it this year, because I mean, the pandemic has been hard on everyone, but I think about myself at 16, 17, and having, if I had to be locked up and didn't have any real outlet or any support outside my immediate family. So and we released it right before the holidays, which I think is even more tough. But I mean, I think it's just kind of, for me, I hope that it's something that queer people can watch to find themselves in some way, to find that solidarity in this story in some, in their own way. But then also I think it's for families with queer people in them. My hope was that families like mine would watch it and realize that what the coming out process is like, and how it can fundamentally reshape your entire life, and in a good or bad way. So and then the role that they play in that. So that's kind of who I was hoping would kind of take this in terms of like the country world. We called it Three Chords and a Lie because it's based off the old Harlan Howard quote. He famously said that country music is just three chords and the truth. But the truth is that for queer people, we don't get to tell our truths, and if we do, they're either exaggerated, or it wasn't as bad as you thought, or that didn't really happen and you feel gaslit. This was a space where I could honestly share my experience because they were real, they were hard, they were tough, they still affect me. But this was a way of putting it into the world that, trying to do something good with the bad. So, yeah, I hope in all of that you found some answer to.
Mine's really different to Brandon's though. Mine is, I wanted all of those people, obviously the queer community, to embrace it. I felt like that was the easier thing. That was the choir who were ready for this. A lot of the people I hoped might engage with it. And there's sort of a reason that I structured the glossy more like, this is a documentary about gay country artists, a little bit more in the first 5-10 to give you that sense of, oh, I have a safe viewing platform to witness something that I will have no resonance with. Here's a very, like, some of the framing of the interview pieces are much more structured, and then it gets more and more like in your face as it goes, because I wanted people who wanted to keep an objectivity and a distance from the subject matter to feel safe to get into something that they really have no place in. Perhaps people, who don't have a country music exposure, or in particular parents who, might want to dip their toe into, they might have gay kids who they are distanced from. In a sense, it's the sort of movie I hoped people like Brandon's mom and family would be able to watch and understand. Because if we can do that, then I think that we really have, apart from just helping the ones who we always want to help, we might have an opportunity to engage in conversation the ones who are still putting up the barriers between family members. So, that was sort of my hope with the project.
Great, thank you. Just in our last few minutes, I'm going to turn to a couple of questions from our audience that have been selected from the Q&A function by Carsey-Wolf staff. So thank you to everybody who submitted questions. Autumn Wilbur asks, so we've talked a lot about the things about this film that were difficult. I really like dug in, sorry. But the things that were challenging. But what was the most rewarding and sort of, supportive experience in the course of creating this film? Maybe one for each of you.
For me, I always loved Brandon as a friend and respected him as a musician, respected him as a person. The thing that gives me the most satisfaction was being able to share something so raw and so intimate with him, and for him to trust me to take that journey with him and share parts of his life that I know are really sensitive and delicate. I've always felt close to Brandon, but the experience was bonding in a way that I've never had before in a creative sense, or that was for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best part about making this film, outside of just getting to spend a week with this guy, was the show was really fun. Other than that last song, the show was a lot of fun. No, but when I showed up, there was a guy sitting there. We were there really early, obviously, and he had come earlier, and he was like, "You don't know me, but I'm your kindergarten teacher's husband." And so that was like the beginning of everyone that showed up. And like I said, I'd never played my hometown before. And so there were crowds of people that I went to high school with. I had teachers from kindergarten all the way up to, when I graduated. I had, teachers, coaches, extended family, people that I went to church with, that I just assumed over the past decade had kind of written me off. But, woman that I sang in choir with, grabbed me by the hands and said, I think what you're doing is so important. Please keep doing it. And, even my aunt, who I'm, have always been close with, I was packing up and leaving, and she slipped me a note, and she said, you should be nothing but very proud of what you've done here tonight. So I think it was just like getting all of these people together that were so much a part of my world that a lot of I just assumed wrongly of, and it was really nice to have them there and to have them be a part of this project. It meant a lot to me.
That's great. And just one final question before we wrap up. Karen Kirschenbaum Reynosa, pardon me if I mispronounced. She speaks as a high school teacher here in California, where she says she feels that there's actually a lot of institutional support for LGBTQ youth. And so seeing you tell your story sort of raises the question for her, whether there's something particular to the South that presents certain challenges for LGBTQ youth in maybe less urban areas. But I also wonder if maybe you could address that in relation to your experience of going to like Chattanooga Pride, right? And perhaps whether there's a set of changes underway that might help us rethink what we understand the experience of queer people in the South to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the documentary, although Trent cut out my best line. I was like, what happened to my best line? I was so shocked when I got to Chattanooga Pride. I was like, I expected a couple drag queens and tube tops on a flatbed, like I wasn't expecting anything. And we show up in this huge, gathering of queer people and allies in downtown Chattanooga, this place that, I had just, hidden myself in for so long and was just so afraid of. And there were all these, younger people just being at Pride, and it was a great experience. So I'll say that when I grew up, when I was there, I imagine that it was very different than what it is now. And I think that it's obviously changing for the better, which is really exciting to see.
And can I jump in on just to answer that as a purely objective person, didn't grow up in the South, not an American, but observing the whole thing, to me, and this is not an anti-religion statement, I have beliefs of my own, but I think that the thing I asked everyone who we interviewed, Cody, Shelley, Pam, everyone, what role religion played in their experience of acceptance or not accepting gayness, or queerness, or any difference really. And to a person, it was the first thing that came up. And I think that as religion evolves and includes and adapts, so will the experience for queer people in that place in particular. I think Shelley had an incredible quote, which is like, it's the South, it's the Bible. And in a sense, as frustrating as it was, it so often was like a little kernel of blockage.
Right. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've hit our time for this evening. I want to thank everybody who joined us today, everybody who submitted questions, and I especially want to give my very sincere thanks to Brandon and Trent for joining us and for being willing to answer my extremely invasive questions.
Thank you.
It's been a delight to get to know you. With that, I will sign off and say thank you once again to our guests, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.